So this is where we're going to start taking notes for a quiz tomorrow. So what happens tomorrow at 1:20? Quiz. And what are you going to have ready to go? Your notes from today, and what are you going to need to write with? Pencils, erasers, pens. I don't care which one you use, but don't ask me for pens and erasers and pencils. So I highly recommend that at the top of the page you write Private Pilot Ground School, or you write Flight 101 or something like that, so you know where it is. And then the very next heading is 01A Pilot Training, because tomorrow on the quiz it'll be really easy. At the top of the quiz it'll say 01A Pilot Training. But after we've been doing this every single stinking day, Monday through Thursday, you're going to wish you knew where in your notes to turn. So whenever you see, it'll always be 01A, 01B, 01C, then 02, ABC, and then we might even hit 10A, 10B, 10C. If you got any questions as we're going along, ask me. That old saying that there's no such thing as a stupid question, I think that's wrong. I think there's lots of stupid questions, but I think this is the place to ask the stupid questions. This is the place to ask those questions. So if you think it's stupid, that's fine. I won't harass you very much. Yes, Brian. I'll take that one right now if you want. Oh, that's a good point. If everything in your folder is all filled out, go ahead and pass it forward. If everything in your folder is all filled out and signed, pass it forward. Question? Are you homeschooling? Okay. No, you don't. That's where the high school fills out some forms. I'll tell you what, if you think you've signed every place you need to sign it, and your parents have signed everywhere that need to be signed it, turn it in. And I'll be looking through it. And then tomorrow when we get here, I'll just harass you in front of all the other students and make you cry. I mean, you don't have to cry if you don't want to. That's all right. I probably won't make you cry that loud. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about in Flight 101 is the Federal Aviation Administration. The Federal Aviation Administration, I'm going to from now on probably abbreviate it with 3 capital letters, FAA, not FFA. FFA is the Future Farmers of America. That is not this class. This is the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. That federal organization, it does pretty much everything concerning aviation. It decides what the rules are. It enforces the rules. It's like they are the police, and they make the laws, and they are the judge. So it's like they are the Judge Dredd of flying. I'm over-exaggerating a little bit. So they make all the rules. The rules, I usually abbreviate the regulations, FARs. FAR is an abbreviation for 3 words, Federal Aviation Regulations. So I'm going to say the phrase FARs a lot, so you need to know what that is. FARs is an abbreviation for Federal Aviation Regulations. There's a boatload of them, and we're going to be covering them throughout this semester. Today we're only going to cover a few. We'll only cover a few every day. We're not just going to spend a day and try to learn all the regulations all at the same time. Has anybody ever read that book from the DMV where you study to take your written test to get your driver's license? Okay, just multiply times 100, and now you can start going, okay, now I know how much I got to know. That's just the rules. There's way more rules. It's probably not times 100. So these regulations are set up if you want to build airplanes or manufacture them, if you want to do repairs on them, if you want to operate them, like you're a pilot or you're an airline. There's all kinds of regulations. It's not like a car. If you want to build a car and drive it down the street, as long as you got the right lights on it, the brake lights work, the headlights are adjusted, you could build a car at home and you could register it in the state of California, but not so with airplanes. If you want to build them, there's certain rules you got to follow. If you want to fix them, can you work on your own car? How old do you have to be in California to fix a car? How old? There's no age requirement. There's no state law that says you have to be a certain age before you can work on a car, is there? Okay, with aviation, there's a whole set of rules about you have to have a mechanic certificate from the FAA to work on an airplane, except under certain circumstances where pilots can do a little bit, like pilots can change spark plugs and change the oil. Operating aircraft, if you're an airline, how do you have to operate your airline? But the ones we're going to be looking at, or if you're operating an aircraft, what does the pilot have to do? Can you fly underneath a bridge? How low can you fly when you're over a city? How low can you fly when you're out in the country? Can you fly upside down? These are interesting questions. And of course, the things that we're going to talk about the most in this class is actually what does it take to become a pilot. But these rules have all the rules about if you want to become a pilot, if you want to become an aircraft mechanic, if you want to be an air traffic controller. You don't have to write down the rest of the ones I'm going to say. But if you want to be able to be a parachute rigger and pack parachutes, that's an FAA certificate. If you want to be a dispatcher at an airline and plan a flight for the airline pilots, a dispatcher is an FAA certificate. There's a repairman certificate. They used to have navigator certificates. Flight engineers, jets used to have 2 pilots and somebody sitting behind the pilots operating all the engines and stuff. Most of it's computerized now, so there's not very many flight engineers left. I'm trying to think if there's any other FAA certificates that I left out. There's probably some somewhere. In any case, if you want to do something in aviation, most of the time you have to get a certificate. Now, can you be an airport manager without a certificate? Yeah. Can you sweep the floors and clean the restrooms at the airport without a certificate? Yeah, you can, but nobody. How many people in here want to sweep floors and clean restrooms at the airport, and that's your career goal? How many people would be willing to sweep floors and clean bathrooms at the airport if you could make enough money to pay for flying lessons? How many people have ever cleaned a public use restroom? Yeah, that's fun, especially on Friday and Saturday nights when all the drunks are throwing up in there. Okay, I'm kidding. It's not really that fun. All right, so FAR has already covered the fact that FAR stands for the Federal Aviation Regulations. And I would suggest as a technique for making notes, when you see that big title on each slide, write that in bigger letters or maybe skip a space when you go to the next slide. So now you skip a space and now the next slide says FARs in capital letters. That way your notes look like the way I'm presenting the material. I think it'll be easier for you to study for the test. Does anybody remember when the test is? Well, there's a quiz tomorrow. There's only one test. It's called the final exam. It's at the very end of the semester. All right. So there's 4 federal aviation regulations that I want to talk about a little bit right now. There's FAR 61, FAR 91, FAR 21, and FAR 91 and 121. So Part 61 and Part 91, we're going to talk about them. Or you could write down requirement to get a pilot certificate. And you notice I'm not saying the word pilot license. You get a driver license. If you look on your driver's license, it actually said the word license. But if you look at a pilot certificate, it actually says you get a certificate. So there is no such thing in the United States as a pilot's license. Anybody who says that isn't paying enough attention. You earn a pilot certificate. So we're going to talk a lot about Part 61. We're going to talk a little bit about it today. What does it take to become a pilot? Part 43 is talking about airplane maintenance. Airplane maintenance. If we're going to go work on an airplane, how well do you have to do it? Like, for instance, write this part down, but if you have a pilot certificate and you own or you have an airplane that's letting you use, you can put in tires, you can change the spark plugs, you can change the engine and the filter, you can take the seats out, the carpet, you can paint the airplane, you can take the battery out and clean it, replace it, put it back in. There's a lot of things you can do. If it's a fiberglass part that if it breaks, the airplane won't fall apart. It's called non-structural. You can fix that. There's a lot of things pilots can do. And where would you go to look? You'd look under Part 43 to tell you what you could do. Question? Really basic and simple. In fact, if it's complicated, you can't do it. But we're going to talk about that a lot later. And when we get next semester, this semester's all this pilot stuff. and history and careers. Next semester in Valley ROP, it's dedicated, the vast majority of the semester is airplane mechanics. We're going to do ground school for airplane mechanics, and we're going to be out in the lab about half of the time, even if you don't count Fridays. So that's what we're going to do in January. All right, so Part 43 is about maintenance. Part 91, these are, let's just write down rules of the road. So that makes it really easy. When I say rules of the road, obviously in airplanes you're not really on the road, but it's those questions I said earlier. If you're flying over a city, how high do you have to be? If you're flying out in the country, how high do you have to be? Question? 91. 91 is rules of the road. I'll accept that on a test. I would probably call it operating limitations, but I think this is a better phrase for it. Like, for instance, if you're flying over Fresno, you got to stay 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle. If you see a tower out there, you look on your chart, it says the tower is 300 feet high. You got to be at 300 plus another 1,000. If you're flying out in the country and it's not a congested area, not a lot of people, you can be 500 feet away from any vehicle, structure, or person. Part 61 is the requirements to get a pilot certificate. Sorry if I wasn't very clear. Part 43 is doing maintenance. If you're going to do maintenance on an aircraft, you got to look up Part 43. And if you want to know what the rules are for pilots, that's Part 91. We're going to talk a whole lot in this class about 61 and 91. Part 121 is airlines. We're not going to talk very much about Part 121, but if you want to become an airline transport pilot, if you want to be an airline pilot, you'll end up, not in this class, but you'll end up getting familiar with FAR Part 121, because to start up an airline, you have to do all the things that are in the regulations for Part 121, which if I just stood here and read them, it would probably take me an hour at least, maybe two, just to read FAR Part 121. All right, next I want to cover what's involved in taking flying lessons. So if you said, you know what, I want to grow up and be a pilot, the first place to start is to get your first pilot certificate. And you're going to probably go to a place called an FBO. FBO stands for 3 words: Fixed Base Operator. Fixed, F-I-X-E-D, Fixed Base Operator. A fixed base operator is really just a business at the airport. And you don't have to write this down, but businesses at the airport that count as FBOs, they rent airplanes, they sell you gas, they do maintenance on airplanes. It's not the hotel next to the airport, okay? It's not the 7-Eleven next to the airport. It's talking about a company there that is serving aviation, and it's called an FBO. So if I use that phrase, FBO, you know that it's a business on the airport. They can sell airplanes, they rent airplanes, they do flight instruction, they sell gas, they do maintenance, they work on the radios of your airplane. I'm going to go back and forth probably calling flight instructors CFIs or calling CFIs flight instructors. CFI stands for 3 letters, Certified Flight Instructor. Looks like my whatchamacallit is dying. All I have left is orange. Let's see if that'll work. No. Certified Flight Instructor. That CFI, that 3 letters for CFI, that's what student pilots, that's what we usually refer to flight instructors as, because that's what they are. They're certified by the FAA, and they're a flight instructor. And in fact, the certificate they have, it says Certified Flight Instructor, and it's on a certificate. That's the person who's going to give you flying lessons. Now, flight instructors can also do ground school. And you don't have to write this down, but you can be a ground instructor and just teach ground school as well. Now, there's 2 ways to do flight instruction. You can either do it, well, let me back up. If you're just a plain old flight instructor, let's say you can put your pencils down here for a second. If I am a flight instructor, I can, and you tell me, Jaron, that you want to go flying and take flying lessons. We call up some FBO that has airplanes for rent, and I say, yo, what's up? Can I rent your plane and get flight instruction in it? And they'd say, can you talk English? But if they said yes, then we'd go there, and you would rent the airplane from them, and then you would pay me money. Or I might have my own airplane at Reedley Airport, and you can pay me for the airplane, and you can pay me as a flight instructor. You and I never have to talk to the FAA. The FAA never comes out and inspects us, because I have a flight instructor certificate from the FAA, and that's all I need. Well, I guess you need money, and we need a safe airplane, and we'll talk about how to determine if an airplane is safe. Okay, this is doing it under Part 61. Part 61 means that the FAA has not approved your school. It's not that it's bad, but they haven't come out and inspected it. So now you can pick up your pencil, and a Part 61 school means the flight instructor is the school, and the FAA does not approve it. The flight instructor is the school, and the FAA does not approve it. They don't come out and inspect it. They don't do anything. And that's legal, it's moral, it's ethical. All of the flight training I ever got was from a flight instructor under FAR Part 61. There's a second kind of a school, and it's a Part 141 school. Federal Aviation Regulation Part 141 is an FAA-approved school. So if somebody says, oh yeah, I'm flying at a 141 school, that means the FAA has approved it. And when I say the word approved, you don't have to write the rest of this part down, but they see how that's going to be trained. They come out, they inspect your airplanes, they inspect your instructors, they inspect all your training equipment, they look at all your lesson plans on how you're going to teach it, and they have to say, yeah, that's going to be good, or they say, no, it's not, fix it. And then they come back every 6 months or a year and inspect your school. Brian? Generally, very much, which in our cost of the airplane per hour and cost of the flight instructor, I guess cost of the flight instructor is probably a little bit higher. The good news thing about 141 schools is they're a little more structured, and you're probably going to go boom, boom, boom and get through your pilot certificate faster, and therefore with less hours, and therefore spending less money. It's not that a Part 61 instructor is bad, but they may not be so structured, and it's like, yeah, let's go flying, to-do. Well, if you're paying $120 an hour for an airplane and $50 an hour for the instructor, that's $170 an hour. You don't really want to go to-do. But when I was teaching, when I was a flight instructor, I flight instructed under Part 61, and it was, here's the things we got to do, here's the lesson we just had, okay, read up on this, that's the lesson we're going to do when we get back, because as a student, I didn't like having to spend extra money on flying lessons. So I've seen good Part 61 instructors and lousy ones. I've seen good 141 schools, and I've seen lousy ones. And in addition to taking flying lessons, and when I say ground school, you got to go to ground school, but it works like this. You don't actually have to go to a classroom. You can buy books and read up on your own, and then when you want to go take the written test, you find a flight instructor, and they'll quiz you for 20, 30, 40 minutes, or they'll give you a practice test, and then they'll write on a piece of paper, I think you know everything you need to pass your written test. You can go take your written. It's called an endorsement. Or you can do an online school. It's usually a couple $100. And you log into a website, and it gives you all the lessons like we're going to be doing in this class. Or you can go to this ground school, or you could do it with an instructor and pay them $50 an hour to teach you ground school. But ground school's 35 hours. What's 35 times 50? $1,750. So most people don't do it one-on-one with an instructor. All right, so we're going to look at what are the types of pilot certificates that you could earn. Now, the name of this class is Private Pilot Ground School. So obviously, Private Pilot is one type of pilot certificate. So Private Pilot is the first pilot certificate you can get. Let me rephrase that. It's for professional pilots. It's usually the first one. There are a couple of certificates that aren't quite as good, and we're not going to worry about them too much because you can't do very much. Like if you get a sport pilot certificate, you can never fly at night. and you can never fly an airplane that has more than 2 seats, and you can never fly an airplane that goes faster than 120 miles an hour. So why get a sport pilot certificate when if you just added about 30 or 40% more money, you could fly airplanes that'll go 300 miles an hour and carry 10 people, and you can fly at night. Also, if you get a sport pilot certificate, you can never, ever fly in the clouds. And if there's clouds and you can't go fly, then you're unhappy. So most people earn a private pilot certificate. Now, if you want to fly through the clouds, you need to get an instrument rating. So that's what you ought to write next to instrument rating, is if you get an instrument rating, that means you can fly in the clouds. Which it's a little bit more complicated, and the weather is lousier. But sometimes the weather's not lousy when there's clouds, thunderstorms, and clouds. Then you got to start paying more attention. For instance, with a private pilot certificate, you have the instrument rating. You can fly in the day, you can fly at night, but you can't fly in the clouds. So that's usually what people do, is they earn their private pilot certificate and they start flying and they go, yeah, this is cool. Oh wait, I can't go flying because the clouds are in the way. Darn, I can't go. They do that a few times and say, you know what, I think I'm going to get my instrument rating so I can fly in the clouds. Then there's a commercial pilot certificate. The commercial pilot certificate allows you to get paid. Anybody ever heard of a commercial driver's license, a CDL, for trucks? A couple of people? Okay. If you get a private pilot certificate, you can't charge people money. You can't get paid. And if you rent an airplane, you have to split the expenses between you and the passengers evenly. You all have to pay the same amount. So if there's 4 people, you have to pay at least a fourth of it. You can't just, well, I'll just pay $1 and you guys come up with the other 99. You can't do that. You got to share the expenses evenly. And you can't get paid. So nobody can give you money and say, hey, this package to Bakersfield, I'll give you $100 plus the cost of the airplane. You can say, if I'd love to do that, but I can't do that, because private pilots can't make money when they're flying. Commercial pilots, on the other hand, that's where you can start getting a job and getting paid to be a pilot. We've already talked about CFI, Certified Flight Instructor. The thing I want you to know about CFIs right now is this is usually the first job you get as a pilot. It's kind of weird in aviation. You get your pilot certificates, and you have your commercial certificate, and you have an instrument rating. No one will hire you to do almost anything. There might be a couple of banner towing jobs in LA or Florida where you tow a banner next to the beach. I've seen a very few places where they do skydiving. They might hire you with barely a commercial pilot certificate. But most places, nobody will hire you because there's always somebody there with more flying time than you. So the way you get more flying time is, instead of paying $120 an hour to rent the airplane, you become a flight instructor. You become a CFI. Because if I go flying with Josh and he's taking a flying lesson and he's paying for the airplane and he's giving me $20 an hour, every hour in the airplane, it goes down in his logbook, but I get to write the hour in my logbook. And not only did I not have to pay for the airplane, you gave me money. Sweet. So what you're generally going to do is, you don't have to write these numbers down. Generally, you get your private instrument commercial and then your CFI, and then you be a flight instructor for a couple of years. When you get your commercial and your CFI, you have about 250 hours approximately, and in order to be a co-pilot at an airline, you need 1,500. So you're shy 1,250 hours. So what do? You get a job as a flight instructor. And if you're at a busy school and you fly 600 hours a year with the student, they pay you money, and in 2 years, you'll have 1,500 hours, and now you can be an airline co-pilot. For that 2 years, not only did you not have to pay for the airplane, somebody paid you. So if you want to become a professional pilot, you need to get your private, your instrument commercial, and then get your CFI, because that's the first job you're going to be able to get, because they hire CFIs when they're brand new pilots at 250 hours. And in fact, right now, there has never been a time better than to become a pilot right now. Because if you had your flight instructor today, your certificate today, and we get out at break time, I'll give you 2 phone numbers to call, and they'll say, can we do a phone interview this afternoon? And you'll say, yeah, and they'll interview you. We'll fly you out to Phoenix, and we'll interview you. And they'll interview you, and as long as you don't screw up and cuss at them and kick them in the shins too badly, and you don't look like you're going to fall asleep or be sick, they'll hire you on the spot, and they'll say, can you start on Monday? There's literally right now flight instructor jobs all over the United States because the airlines, not enough people have entered flight training. And so there's not enough entry-level pilots. And more people are now realizing, hey, this is a good time to get into become a pilot. And they want to go to flight school, but the flight schools need more flight instructors, but there aren't enough flight instructors. Okay, ATP stands for Airline Transport Pilot. 3 words. Airline, A-I-R-L-A-N-E. Airline Transport Pilot. Airline Transport Pilot is what you need to sit in one of the front 2 seats of an airline. If you're operating an airline under FAR Part 121, both the people in the front seat in the United States have their ATP certificate, their Airline Transport Pilot certificate. Every other country in the world, the co-pilot only has to have an instrument rating and a commercial pilot certificate. But about 3 years ago, I guess it was 3 years ago this month, the federal government changed the rules, and now to be the co-pilot, you got to have an ATP. So also what that means is, if you just have a commercial and an instrument rating, you could probably get a job as an airline pilot in another country, which I think is rather interesting. All right, so let's just say, you know what? I want to get my private pilot certificate. You know, if you're here because you have some vague interest in aviation, that's okay. If you're here because you're dead set on becoming a professional pilot, you're both welcome in this class. The first step is to start working on how do I get my first pilot certificate. So here we're going to go with some of the details. While you're taking flying lessons, a portion of it you have to fly the airplane by yourself. It's called solo. And don't ask me where Han Solo came from. That's a name from a movie, several movies. I don't know where his name came from. But in this case, solo, it's not capitalized. It means to fly by yourself. So some of that you have to do by yourself. So that means when you're 16, you can solo. I soloed my first airplane when I was about 16 3/4. I started taking flying lessons when I was 16 1/2, and then I got my pilot certificate about a week after I turned 17. Oh wait, that's the next one. Oh wait, I'll get to that one. No, I'll just do it in the right order. You got to have a medical certificate from the FAA. We're not going to get into the details right now, but you have to go to a doctor, an MD, who's been authorized by the FAA to do medicals for pilots. And you fill out a form, and you pee in a cup, and they listen to your heart and all that other stuff. They do a good eye test and a hearing test and all that stuff. And if you pass and get a medical certificate, then yay, now you can solo and you can become a pilot. There's 3 different versions of it. Their third class is the easiest one to get. And that's for private pilots. You can't carry anybody for hire. You can't carry anybody and be compensated. Second class is for commercial pilots, and first class is for airline pilots. Except, interestingly enough, you don't have to write this down, but airline pilots, only the captain has to pass the first class medical. If you're still the co-pilot at an airline, you still need the second class. And you don't have to write this down, but I recommend if you think you want to be an airline pilot and sit in the captain's seat, don't go get a third class, don't go get a second class. Get a first class medical and make sure you can pass it. Now, if you can only pass a second class medical, that's okay, but you're never going to be the captain. You're always going to be the co-pilot. You got to be 17 to go up for your flying test. So that's a year older. In California, can't you get your driver's license when you're 16? Can you get a permit when you're 15 1/2 or something like that? Okay. So you got to turn 17. There are people that take flying lessons and then pow, on their 17th birthday, they go up and take their flying test. It's called a check ride. Now, this is the same for helicopters and blimps. You don't have to write this down, but for gliders, if you want to fly gliders, you can solo a glider when you're 14 and get your glider pilot certificate when you're 16. All right, the FAA says that if you're going to earn a private pilot certificate, you got to have at least 40 hours of flying in an airplane. But the national average is about 70. And we're going to talk about that on another slide, so you don't have to write that down at the moment. But the minimum is 40 hours of flying. That doesn't count briefings with your instructor. That doesn't count studying. That doesn't count how long it took to do a visual inspection of the airplane. That's how many hours was the engine running. You don't have to write this part down, but in the airplane there is a gauge that measures time. It's called a Hobbs meter. I think it was made by a company called Hobbs. And when the engine turns on, there's an oil pressure switch hooked up to the engine, and when the oil pressure goes up because the engine ran, it pushes a switch and closes it, and now that little gauge in there starts spinning around, and it spins around a tenth of an hour every 6 minutes. And that's how you pay for the airplane. If the engine is running, you're putting it in your logbook, the flying time, even though you're on the ground taxiing, but that's what you pay for, is how much, because the rules say, you don't have to write this down, the rules say you can start logging flying time when the aircraft starts moving with the intention of flying. So usually within about 30 seconds or so after you started the engine, you usually start moving. So it's close enough the FAA says, yeah, use the Hobbs meter. All right, you got to pass a written test. If you take this class across a semester, you need to understand something, that this class is not specifically designed to make sure you know everything to pass that written test, but you'll probably be able to pass it. Because there's some FAA questions that are stupid and we're not going to cover, because you never have to know them as a pilot. So if you want to pass that written test, we'll talk about it later in the semester. There are some things you can do to make sure you can get close to 100%. And then you got to pass a check ride. You can just write the word check ride if you want. If you want to just write the word check ride, that's okay. Officially, it's called an oral and practical test. So I'm going to talk about the oral and practical test. So how many people in here have gone and gotten their driver's certificate? I mean their driver's license. 3 or 4 people. Okay. It works. You tell me if I'm wrong, because I haven't been in California. My kids got driver's licenses in Arizona. You take a written test. You're 15 and a half, you get a permit, you drive around with your folks. In Arizona, after you turn 16, one of your parents has to come in and sign and say they taught you how to drive and blah, blah, blah. And then you go with a DME or DMV, an MVD, DMV, a DMV employee, and they drive around in the car with you. Well, let's see. A couple of people said they took a driving test. So they say turn left, turn right, parallel park, stuff like that, right? Before you got in the car, did you sit in a little office or a cubicle, and did they ask you questions for 2 or 3 hours? No. So there was no oral test. There was the written test you did when you were 15 and a half, and then there's the driving test. The driving test, all they do is say turn left, turn right, go that way, stop, parallel park. So they didn't really ask you a lot of questions in the car, right? Almost no questions. What's that? Yeah. Defrosters, okay, yeah. I don't know, man. Okay, you flunked. Mom, you didn't tell me what defrosters were. Okay, but airplanes and helicopters, blimps, gliders, powered lift, gyroplanes. See, did I miss anything? In flying machines, there's a written test and there's a driving test, but when you show up for the driving test, there's an oral exam. The oral exam for your private pilot certificate takes 2 to 3 hours. I'm not making this up. And they say, okay. They start asking you all questions about all this stuff. That's why this is a 4-credit college class. That's a lot. There's a lot of information. You can, if there's a thing or two you don't know, you can say, I need to look that up. But they'll let you do that about 1% of the time. Pretty soon, if you're looking up every answer, they're going to flunk you. So you got to figure that the oral exam, you got to get about a 99% correct. I'm going to say that again. On the oral exam, you got to get about a 99% correct. And if it's emergency procedures, you better know it cold 100%. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just going to tell you, man, you got to study and you got to know it. All right. So that's the check ride. The check ride takes about 5 hours. So you show up at 8, and if you're done, usually you break for lunch around 11, come back at noon, you go flying, and you're done at 1 or 1:30. The airplane flight usually takes somewhere between a 1.2 and a 1.5. All right. Let's cover how much does it cost to take flying lessons. I'm going to go a little long and get this unit covered, and then we'll still take our 10-minute break. We'll just have a shorter second hour. And these are round numbers. Little two-seat airplanes, training airplanes, rent for about $130 an hour. Instructors go for about $60 an hour. That's not how much the instructor gets paid. That's how much you pay the company that employs them. And everybody flies a different amount of flying time. So the minimum may be 40, and the national average may be 70, but some people can do it in 55 or 60, and some people are going to take 80. And you don't have to write the rest of this down here that I'm going to say here, but the factors are you showing up ready to go every day? Do you fly a lot? If you only fly once every 2 weeks, it's probably going to take you 80 or 90 hours of flying. But if you go take a flying lesson every day, you wait till the summer, you don't have classes, money saved up, and you go flying 5 every day, Monday through Friday, the chances are you'll be done before you get to 70 hours. So, and every student's different. Some people, it just takes a little bit longer for it to all sink in. It's not because they're stupid, it's just it takes them longer to learn. So the national average is about 70 hours. Now, 10 of that is solo. You don't have to take the instructor, but you could start crunching some numbers and see what would happen here. Let's see, 130 plus 60 is 190. What's $190 an hour times 70? Anybody got a calculator? Well, what's 200 times 70? $14,000 minus a little bit. So we can crunch all kinds of numbers, but it's going to be $12,000 to $14,000 bucks. I'm not trying to say, make you cry. It's just ridiculously expensive. Does anybody remember when minimum wage was $2.50 an hour? When I learned how to fly, I had a job at Pizza Reedley. $2.50 an hour, and I was lucky. I was a very fortunate person. I was 15. I had just turned 15. I was like 15 and a month old. And I came home from my sophomore year in high school, the very first day. My older brother was working at the pizza joint. And I always told him, whenever they need somebody, let me know. I want to get a job. So the dishwasher was sick. So he called me up and said, hey, you want to come in and be a dishwasher? Heck yeah. So it's like 4:30 in the afternoon. I got my bicycle, rode across town to Valentino's, and I washed dishes. Dishwasher never came back. About 3 weeks after I got there, one of the pizza cooks got in a motorcycle accident, and he was in the hospital. He never did come back, but I got promoted out of dishwasher to $2.75 an hour. And when I say I was very fortunate because I got a job, and my parents made enough money that I didn't have to bring my paycheck home every week and say, here, Mom, here's some help with the rent, or here's some help with the groceries, or here's some help with the utilities. My parents let me spend that money on flying lessons. So I think I was a very fortunate young man at the age of 15. And guess what I did? When I had money saved up, I worked there for about a year and a half, and then I started taking flying lessons. All right, you got to cover ground school, whether it's going to a college class or a night class, or you pay for a $200 cram course, or you pay an instructor to do it. And then you got to buy stuff. You don't have to write down the following list. You can write it down, but I'm not going to ask you on the test. You got to have books. Usually you got to have a headset in the airplane. The airplane makes a lot of noise. One, you want to save your hearing, and two, you want to be able to hear your instructor. You got to buy a plotter. You buy E6B. You got to buy charts. You got to buy pencils, pens, erasers. You can write those things down. I'm not going to ask you what that list is, but there's probably $500 or $600 of stuff you need to get. A good set of headsets that is a low cost is between $200 and $300. But you're going to wish you had it because you can hear the instructor so much better. And if you want to take the written test, the FAA written test costs $150. How much does it cost at the DMV to take a written test? It's free. Awesome. How much does it cost to take the driving test? Huh? I think it's free. I don't know. In Arizona, I don't think they charge money. And then when you go up for your check ride, it's $600 to pay the examiner for your check ride. Holy mackerel, $600. Well, it's going to take 5 hours, so they're getting about $120 an hour. But they have a lot of insurance. They got to pay liability insurance. Holy mackerel. Yeah, Brian. I'm sorry, this is for the private pilot. My apologies. This ought to read cost of a private pilot. Cost of a private pilot. Thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate that. Don't ever hesitate to point out that I didn't write things down very well. I get it all wrapped up in my brain. I think I know what I'm talking about, and then I show it to you, and you're going, what the hell are you talking about? Okay, we're getting pretty close to done. So a typical flying lesson, you're going to go out and you're going to do what's called a pre-flight inspection. You actually go out to the airplane and you look at it. You check the oil, you check the gas, you look at the tires to make sure that they're full of air. You don't have to write down any of this list. You can, but I'm not going to ask you what do you check on a pre-flight inspection. You walk around the airplane and look at things, make sure they're not dented, make sure things aren't broken. There's a list, a checklist you follow, and you look at each one of those items. And then after you get in the airplane, you fire it up and you make sure everything works right. You make sure the engines work and the radios work and stuff. But before you actually even get in the airplane, you do what's called a pre-flight inspection. So that takes about 15 minutes. You're going to also check a whole bunch of stuff. WX is an abbreviation for weather. Weather is spelled W-E-A-T-H-E-R. Weather is spelled W-E-A-T-H-E-R. So if I use the abbreviation capital W, capital X, that's an abbreviation for weather. So you're going to check to see if the weather's okay to go flying. NOTAMs is an abbreviation for Notice to Airmen. Notice to Airmen. Airmen is one word, A-I-R-M-E-N. Yes. Yeah, Notice to Airmen. NOTAM is an abbreviation for Notice to Airmen. Airmen is spelled A-I-R-M-E-N. And most of the airmen that they're talking about are pilots. But you might be a flight engineer. And so you don't have to write this down because we're going to get into NOTAMs, but NOTAMs tells you if a runway's closed, are the night lights at the airport working or not? Are they doing construction and there's a big giant, tower on one end where they're pouring cement or something? And you're going to check aircraft performance. You don't have to write these things down, but aircraft performance is with how much I put on the aircraft, can I get off the ground? How long of a runway do I need? How long of a runway do I need to land? Is the airplane nose heavy, or is the airplane tail heavy? So we're going to go through all of these things. You're going to check aircraft performance. So there's another 15 minutes. And then the flight instructor shows up, and you're going to get a briefing from the CFI before you take off. It's called a pre-flight briefing. Pre-flight briefing. If you type that into a word checker, it says you're misspelling it, but that's what we call it in aviation. We call it a pre-flight briefing. So your instructor is going to make sure you know what's going to go on during that flight. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to taxi out. We're going to take off. We're going to fly to the northeast side of the airport, and we're going to fly S-turns about a road, and we're going to do circles about a point, and we're going to do some slow flight and do some stalls, and then we're going to come back and do takeoffs and landings for 2 or 3 times, then we're going to land. And I know if you don't know what any of that stuff is, don't feel bad. A typical flight lasts anywhere from an hour to just under an hour and a half. I'd say an average training flight is a 1.2 or a 1.2. Because usually you get tired because you're concentrating a lot. Anybody ever go take a driving lesson in a car? How many people have taken a driving lesson in a car as the student? Yeah, think about that, driving for an hour or two, and we're not talking freeway driving. Think about driving in downtown Fresno during rush hour on Blackstone. Yeah, it's like an hour of that. If you're not used to doing it, that's a long hour. So anything more than an hour, a little more than an hour, is you're wasting your money. And then after you land, you tie the airplane up, and then the instructor briefs you how well you did, the things you did well, and briefs you on the things that you need to improve. It's called a post-flight briefing. So all of this takes about 2.5 hours. So you show up 15 to 30 minutes before, let's say you got a lesson that's scheduled at 2. You show up about 1:30, a quarter to 1. You check the weather, the aircraft performance NOTAMs. You go out and do a pre-flight of the aircraft. You have gas delivered and pumped in it if it needs gas. Then at 2 o'clock, your instructor's done with the previous student. You sit down, do a briefing, pre-flight briefing. You go fly, you come land. You do the post-flight briefing, and it's coming up on 4 o'clock. The instructor has just enough time to go in, get a drink of water, go to the bathroom, and pow, they're ready for their 4 o'clock student. And don't worry about that last one. We're not going to cover content. I think we've had enough for today. So we're just going to stop right there.